Well, nobody is agitated more than me for something to be done about the criminal trade across the English Channel. I was covering this story pretty much before anybody else. The numbers have exploded. In the end, we found out it was 28,500 people that crossed the Channel by small boats last year. Yesterday, 600 young men came into Kent, 600 undocumented young males came into Kent. The weather is set fair today. It'll be another 600 today, I'm sure. And you know, last year, the biggest days were 1,000. Well, this year, the biggest days will be 2,000, and here's why. The boats they're using used to take 16 to 18. The new boats they're using take, on average, about 40 people. Some of the new boats have taken as many as 70. So the government have announced their most radical plan to date, and that is to build a big camp up in North Yorkshire to process some people, and the rest will be flown off thousands of miles to Rwanda. Why are they doing it? It's very easy. They're in trouble. They're not just in trouble because of Partygate and the first fine for the Prime Minister and the expectation there are more to come. After all, lawmakers can't be lawbreakers. No, they're in trouble because of the migrant crisis and the effect it's having on people's lives. Every single day, I get emails from you, many of you who subscribe and watch this channel, about how it's impacting your life. Weddings being cancelled in hotels, local communities really worried about an influx of young men wandering around their streets. I also have to say, I get letters from people saying, our kids are on the council house waiting list. They've been told it'll be at least a year, maybe 18 months before anything becomes available. And yet they see local councils rehousing those who've crossed the Channel. You see, it's not that we're hard-hearted as a nation, far from it. It's just that we find it despicable that criminal gangs bring these young men over in such numbers. So the government in trouble. And of course, tens of thousands of you trying to get away for Easter. And you've seen, haven't you, every day, scenes of chaos at Heathrow. Do you know why? Because Border Force staff are being sent away from Heathrow and sent to Dover. So wherever you look, this is impacting on the lives of millions of people in Britain. And there's a real sense of anger that it's 6 years on since we voted to take back control of our borders, and now we're being made a mockery of. A crisis also in the Border Force. Resignations from Border Force in Kent mounting, as men and women say, we joined to protect the country. We didn't join Border Force to effectively be some kind of taxi service. Not, of course, that they pick up most of the brunt. No, that's left to the volunteers in the RNLI. Many of them self-employed. This is costing a lot of them a huge amount of money to do. I wonder just how long the lifeboat crews can go on. They've seen resignations too. So here's the big plan. Rwanda, will it work? That's really the question. Well, the Prime Minister is at Lydd Airport this morning in Kent, very close to Dungeness, which is the second biggest destination for migrant boats to arrive. Indeed, many that come into Dungeness aren't even picked up by the lifeboats or Border Force. They land on Mashingle beaches, and you see manhunts with helicopters taking place across the Kent countryside. If, and I really mean if, within the next week, we start seeing plane loads being taken to Rwanda, that may well act as a short-term deterrent. After all, why would you pay a criminal trafficker 3,000 euros, 5,000 euros, if you thought immediately you'd be sent to Rwanda? Now, I did say if it happens, and I say if because we are so used to Priti Patel and just occasionally Boris Johnson making really big statements. We're sending in the RAF, we're sending in the Navy. You've heard it all before. I would be surprised if any of those flights take off. As I say, if they do, it would be a short-term deterrent. Long-term, it ain't going to work for two reasons. The first is it's difficult to think of a country with a much worse recent human rights record than Rwanda, and it's only a matter of time before we start to get stories from camps in Rwanda about abuses of all kinds. And that would lead, I think, to some sense of international outrage. The Australians face this. This is what they did 10 years ago. They shipped people off to an island, but as stories mounted of abuse, they decided that wasn't the right policy. So as I say, short term it could work, longer term there'll be awful, awful stories. But there's a bigger reason why none of this will work. There's a bigger reason why the government can't solve this. And of course, they're pretending they can solve it because May the 5th is coming up. It's the local elections, and they're terrified of the impact a loss of control of our borders is having on their own voters and potential voters. Now, the real reason is Brexit's not being completed. You see, we may have left the European Union, but we're still a member of the European Convention on Human Rights. We still have that court in Strasbourg that can make rulings. We have, of course, the incorporation of that into British law under the Human Rights Act. And as soon as just one case of abuse in Rwanda is confirmed, you can bet your life there will be court cases, human rights lawyers that will prevent the next plane loads from going. If we're really going to get back control of our borders, we must get rid of the Human Rights Act. We must get back to the principles of liberty, freedom, and justice by which we've lived for many centuries in this country, and I think in a better, fairer way than the rest of the world. That's what it's going to take, and then the only policy that stops the cross-channel trade is by simply returning people back to France. That is the only way we're going to solve this, and if we don't, well, it's 5,000 already that have crossed the channel, and that's while sea temperatures are still very cold. We're on course. We're certainly 3 times where we were this time last year. We're on course for 75 to 100,000 young, undocumented males coming into this country at a massive expense to the UK taxpayer and a security threat to our nation. And this is something that will engulf the government. Rwanda, well, Priti Patel, well done for trying. At least you're doing something, but it isn't going to work. All the while, we're signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights, and that is the only way we're ever going to solve this.